transferred to the USA West Coast by the Grateful Dead.
Hello everyone.
With people streaming in now.
People are arriving. We need more chairs, don't we? Hello everyone. We're just going to give a bit of time for people to come in. Like your photos, Graeme.
You recognise me, did you? The one on the left, of course.
James, how can you change the...
Oh, yes.
What would your mama say? Pretty baby. What would your mama say? Pretty baby. What would your mama say? She heard my pretty baby. So they marching down the bed.
Maybe one more minute.
Yeah.
Oh, where is that pin?
Oh, Margaret Loud, do you remember her? Hello Margaret, you in Malaysia? We're just listening to Graeme's choice of music as the attendees come in. We'll get started shortly.
Adelaide. Leicester.
Good morning to Tim Goodacre.
Collection of backpack presents.
Yeah. Come in this shop. Come on.
Karolinska. Hi, Ebba.
Peter Vermack from Birmingham. Rizwana Imran, also from Birmingham.
Right.
Mills.
Yeah, hi, Mills.
Hi, Mills. We've got PPSs here as well, and Jeremy. We've all got our masks on.
Oh, wow, from Kenya. Hi, Kenneth. Go. Right. Shall we get started?
Yeah.
Right. Let me just... Right. Oops, sorry, that was a bit blunt.
Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to our webinar series from Stoke Mandeville, and I'm here today with Alex Murray and James Chan is here. We've also got Paul Pointer-Smith and Jeremy Rodrigues all in the office, and it's our great pleasure today to introduce Graeme Perks. I'm going to let Alex just say a few words as she has recently worked with him as a consultant in Nottingham.
Lovely to see you all, and thanks Graeme for joining us so much. What can we say? The best collaborator and mentor that we know, and we're really looking forward to hearing some of your pearls and hopefully having some fun chats at the end and some good questions. So lovely to see you. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I'll start. It's a real privilege to be with you, and I never would have expected anything like this would happen to me. I just look on myself as a very simple surgeon who's been extremely lucky in life, and you can see on the bottom left photo I started out as a small Fry, eldest son to two people who'd never been to university. My father was a naval officer, having gone to the Dartmouth Naval College, and in the middle you can see that in 1979 almost 50% of my medical school colleagues were female, which was phenomenal, and I've had a phenomenal time ever since, particularly from the contribution of the female surgeons I've worked with. So let me thank everybody, and I can't name lots of people because then I'd forget somebody that I should have named. So I've decided it'll just be anonymous, but I've had so many mentors, colleagues, trainees, all of whom have contributed enormously to my career, not least of which, of course, I've had one secretary for 25 years and she's just retired. So I'm standing here on the shoulders of giants, as many of you are, and those of you that come after us, hopefully you'll be able to stand on our shoulders and see that bit further than we saw. So Sir Benjamin Rank was the doyen of Australian plastic surgeons, and I trained in Melbourne and had the privilege of giving him a ride in my old jalopy one day, which was something that I've always treasured since. And of course, he was a protege of Gillies, and so many of the surgeons in the UK are proteges of people who were proteges of Gillies. So it goes on. And I can't start my talk without giving apologies to the people that I've upset or haven't treated as well as I should have done along the way. What I'm going to try and do is give you some things that we call WWW, what worked well, and then reflect on even better if, EBI, which is a good format my youngest brother, who's a leadership coach, suggested when we had debriefing sessions, which I would try and have with my trainees after every operating list. This is a really significant photograph because it's the hospital corridor in Nottingham City Hospital. And early on in my 25-year career here, I was walking along the corridor one day, and as people would go past, they'd say, "How are you?" And I would go, "I'm not bad, thank you." And I cannot explain why, but one day I thought to myself, why do I say, "I'm not bad, thank you"? I'm great. I'm having a great time. So henceforth, every time somebody stopped me and asked me how I was, I would say, "I'm great." And I felt good about it. And some of them looked very surprised. And I even had one registrar who asked me one day, "What are you on?" Which made me smile. However, it's worked really well, and I think you'll find everybody who's involved in any mentoring talks about the positive feedback loop. So if you're positive, it's very easy to make other people around you positive too. So the corridor is battered and patched, and my career has been battered and patched too. Remember that whatever happens to you and however lucky you think you are, there's actually a cultural legacy behind it all. And I read a very good book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, which made me think about this even more. And I realized that by being born in October 1955, I was actually the eldest in my year, and I was therefore larger than many other people in my peer group. And Malcolm Gladwell brings this out in many of his chapters. So therefore, I was easy to be picked for the rugby team because I was larger than many other people. And so it went on. Unfortunately, the year that I started at school, my father, who was a jet fighter pilot in the Royal Navy in the Fleet Air Arm, died in a flying accident. And so my mother was widowed, and I was 9, and she had 3 boys to bring up. What I didn't realize until some years later, that the good fortune that we had that my father died in 1964 and not in 1963 meant that there had been a change in the widow pension for wives of servicemen in the Navy. Prior to the change in the widow pension rules, apparently wives had to turn up in front of 3 admirals at the Admiralty and were sized up, and if they looked pretty attractive, then they wouldn't get a pension because it was assumed they would remarry. So how far things have changed since then. And it was brought home to me last night by a fantastic documentary I recommend to you all called RBG, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the influence that simple people can bring by pursuing things that are right and just. Because we were fortunate to have a pension, I carried on at the private school that I'd been sent to. My parents having decided that because my father was away at sea so much and rarely home, I should have some stability through school. And I was fortunate, because of my size, to compete successfully rowing and playing rugby. And I successfully managed to negotiate an entrance to medical school. I'm quite sure in part because I was sporting, which counted for quite a lot back in those days. Unfortunately, I wasn't a particularly bright student and have never been so. And I failed my second MB exams after 2 years, probably because I spent too much time rowing. When it came up to medical school finals, I was summoned, as everybody had been, to the dean, who gave us a resume of what he thought we should expect out of our future careers. And because I was one who'd failed my second MB, I was told in no uncertain terms, don't expect to get a post in the hospital here. Well, I had no expectations, so I set forth to do the exams and to try and do the best I could. And it's really from here that I began to realize that serendipity played such a big role in my life. I have no idea why I've been so lucky, but it's certainly been something that just goes along with being Graeme Perks for some reason. I was amazed to find that I'd done well enough to be given honours vivas. For those of you that are outside the UK, this is a distinction on top of your degree. So to my great surprise, I was the only person in the year who had honours vivas in medicine and in surgery. Well, I didn't think I had any time to revise psychiatry and took a punt that there wouldn't be any in the medical medicine viva. You can imagine my amazement when I turned up and lo and behold, there's a consultant psychiatrist asking the questions. Well, serendipity being what it is, I got honours in surgery and I didn't get honours in medicine. And so I decided that, well, if I had honours in surgery, I really ought to pursue a career in surgery and make good use of it. Because I hadn't been expected to do at all well, I had a job in the periphery for my first 6 months. And for the second 6 months, I came back to the hospital. So I worked in the medical school where I trained from February 1980. And the job I was given was to have a split between oncology and cardiology. Well, this had two great benefits. I worked for women in the oncology department, and they were truly inspirational for me. And then I worked in cardiology, and it was through working in cardiology that I met a woman who subsequently became my wife of 37 years. In moving through surgical training, I had a post in Sheffield where I was expected to stay on and be a registrar, but a surgical registrar job came up in the north of England, in the northeast, which had an exchange offered to Australia. By chance, yet again, this job was interviewed before the job in Sheffield, and I was successful, so I went there with a view to trying to go on the exchange to Australia. When the time came, to my surprise, I was the only person who applied to go to Australia, and hence off I went. In Australia, I learnt about the 3 A's for success, and these are that you have to make yourself available. Hello, I'm here. You have to be affable, and finally, you have to be able. And those 3 things will get you through life most of the time. To these, I added that you should be aspirational. My father had brought us up to believe that you had to aim for the sky because you might then hit the ceiling. If you aim for the ceiling, you probably wouldn't get off the floor. The other thing that's really important, I think, is to be altruistic. And one of the great benefits of being a consultant has allowed me to do things. Oh, sorry, hang on. has allowed me to do things that would not have been possible because of the income that I've had. So I have on occasion paid for patients to have operations that they couldn't have through the NHS because I felt they were being treated badly or unfairly. And I've been able to do things that I would not have thought possible. One of the things about altruism is that it doesn't cost you anything, but it brings great benefit to somebody else. Take note here, I'm not going to read them out, but you can see on the left all the things that I think are difficult, and on the right everything that's easy. Well, of course, all the things that matter in life are difficult, and those are the things that you have to aspire to do. So please take note, it costs you nothing at all to turn up on time and be cheerful. So please pursue the things on the left, not the things on the right. When I look at what's happened in my clinical career and what's worked for me, these are some of the things that have helped. When I was training in Australia, I noticed that the private patients would get letters written to them by the consultant. And I decided that really, I didn't wish to treat any private patients any differently than the NHS patients. I felt all patients should be treated the same. So I adopted the policy of writing my clinic letters to the patients and sending a copy to the doctor. This had the advantage that it was much more personal, and the patient then had me writing to them in a language that I'd used to try and explain what was happening in the clinic. I then would phone the relatives after surgery so that they knew that everything had gone well, or if it hadn't, I could explain something that hadn't gone well. For all my patients in the private sector, I gave them my mobile number, and only on one patient did I not give the mobile number because I wasn't sure that I trusted the patient. You'll smile when I tell you that giving my mobile number to a private patient once came back to bite me because she rang me and asked if I'd like to go out for coffee. I knew that her husband was working away at the time because I'd actually fixed up his hand a few weeks before from a work injury. I never had anybody abuse my mobile number, and I gave quite a number of my private, I gave a lot of my NHS patients my number too, particularly the patients with cancer who were having difficulties coping. One of the big things that I think has really made a difference to the way I treat the patients has been to take the order in which we brought up to take the history from the patient and reverse it, so that I've tried to make it more person-centered. You'll all recognize that what we were taught was we sit down with the patient and say, well, what's your presenting complaint? How long have you had it? Etc., etc., drug, medicines, allergies, family history. Well, that's fine, but I thought to myself, you could do better than this. So now what we do is I ask them, do you run a busy life, busy job? And if I've got a patient who wants to engage, we'll talk about the highlights of their career. Have you someone to share life with? And one of the fun things is to ask them how they met, because they're always keen to tell you a little bit about that. Then we can talk about how it works for them in terms of relationships, partners, family, and so on, past medical history. And finally, I'll come round to talk about what it is that they've come to the hospital for on this occasion, because I think that it's more important to know about the person than the problem. You've got to make people feel valued, and that's the same for your staff as well as it is for your patients. So I've been really lucky, and so I have a responsibility to people less so. And I think we all have that responsibility. And I'm always a bit disappointed when people who train in surgery choose to rush off and pursue a career purely in aesthetic surgery. I think that's missing out the opportunity to repay some of that responsibility. These are some of the things that have worked for me, and I hope they will work for you too. So I come to work to have shared fun. I was operating in Tbilisi in Georgia 1 year, and I noticed that people were saying to each other, "Are you happy? Are you happy?" And of course they were mimicking me because I was asking them if the operation was going as they wanted to. I've tried to put in more than I take out. and I try to talk to people that I don't know, because I believe that these are the only way in which you're going to meet people who are going to change your life. And I've always tried to explain this to my children and to my trainees. And I was really so blessed when Peter from Kenya rang me to say he'd heard me say something like this on a webinar, and here he was making contact with me. If you think about it, you go to a meeting and you just talk to your friends, they're never going to change your life. And I think it's useful to try and practice this philosophy that it's not about me, it's about everybody else. And if you keep quiet and listen to what other people have got to say rather than blowing your own trumpet, our mother was very keen that we would not blow our own trumpet. She would sit us down and look at us and go, tan tan tarazing boom. A really important feature for you to be successful or lucky, however you look at it, is you've got to be scanning the horizon, looking for something that will be coming and will be something unexpected. And there's a very good bit of research by a guy called Richard Wiseman looking at lucky and unlucky people. In the group that thought they were lucky, compared to the group who are unlucky, it's quite evident that the lucky people tend to horizon scan. He had a little research project where they looked through a newspaper and counted the number of photographs in the magazine. The lucky group, by and large, saw an advertisement on about page 5, which said, if you're counting photographs, look no further. Call this number and win £5. The people who were unlucky dutifully counted all the photographs all the way through to the end and didn't look at anything else and didn't notice the advert. So don't be blinkered, keep a wide perspective. And one of the things that'll really be beneficial for you is to go into the operating theatres of the other specialists and look at what equipment they're using, look at the techniques they have, because you'll find something which will be useful in your own practice. Please keep an interest in your proteges. I find it really disappointing when somebody asks me for a reference, which I duly provide, and then I never hear from them again. Because if I think it's worth giving a reference for you, I'd love you to tell me how you're getting on in the future. And one of the biggest pleasures for me through the unexpected international collaboration that came my way has been trying to make introductions between like-minded folk around the world, because that way we can then amplify the expertise and the collaboration and camaraderie. Another of Daddy's randomers was a comment that one of the children was heard to say one night when my mother overheard them talking about this strange man who'd come to visit. And it turned out that the children thought that we had a collection of people who just passed through the house. And these were usually trainees or surgeons from elsewhere that I would ask my wife if she'd nobly look after them. The lad on the top left here came and lived with us for 5 weeks from Georgia while he visited. And the others are from trainees around the world. Jason, second on the left, is one of my colleagues. And we've had immense fun and beneficial to our children too. They learned a lot about all sorts of interesting parts of the world they would never have discussed and discovered. And now my children have stayed with many of these people around the world, so they've returned the generosity. And generosity of spirit is one of the key features, I think, in our family. This young man tells a very good story, another example of fantastic serendipity, because he was a patient I looked after years ago for a simple problem. Lo and behold, I noticed as I was driving through the village one day an advertisement for the local newspaper, which I rarely noticed. And this lad was on the front of the advertisement looking for crowdfunding to reshape his body after massive weight loss surgery. I rang him and said, look, I don't think you should be doing that. It's not a really good idea. Come and talk to me. It so happened that about the same time I was at a meeting in Mexico and saw a presentation on body contouring after massive weight loss by a superb South American Brazilian surgeon who's become a really good friend. And he became another of our randomers and came to stay with us. But when I approached him and said, look, I think your presentations are great, but what about talking about complications instead of your successes? He said, well, you've got to come to the talk tomorrow. And sure enough, there he was giving a talk on complications. I put him in touch with people in the UK. He got an invitation to come and speak in the UK, and subsequently we invited him again. But it was through that friendship that I asked him whether he'd be prepared to provide a training case for this young man. And that was how we came to bring the surgeons in the department in Nottingham together to operate on this man in the private sector with Carlos at special arrangements with the GMC and so on. Another random transforming somebody's life. Remember that you're not as important as the person that cleans the hospital, because without the hospital being clean, the place would be dirty and people would suffer from infection and die. And so I think it's really important to make sure that you take an interest in them. And here I am just mucking in to help clean the theatre because I don't want the theatre to run late, and I'm happy to do anything to keep the system going. I told the story that lies behind this to my brother, who's a leadership coach. There was a woman who works in the private hospital who moonlit, saving money, or rather earning money, babysitting for consultant surgeons' children. One night she's looking after 6 triplets who belong to a cardiac surgeon, and one of them says to Vilma, "What do you, dear? What do you do, Vilma?" And she said, "Oh, I work in the private hospital in the office." "Oh, you're not as important as our daddy. He's a heart surgeon." And she said, "Well, that's very interesting, dear, but did you know that the lady that cleans the lavatory is more important than your daddy? Because if the lavatory was dirty, everybody would get ill and die." I told my youngest brother this story. He's a leadership coach, and he told me with amusement that he tried it out on a group of bankers. What's the name of the person that cleans the lavatory in your floor? When he was coaching them in the city of London. And they were outraged that they should know something as stupid and useless as that. Everybody's important, and if you don't take an interest in them, then you're not doing your job in the team. I now come to the section which I've entitled Even Better If. And this cartoon from a very good friend in Melbourne sums it up. The problem for us is that we don't communicate very well. So my arse hurts might be you talking to the medical administration and they're saying what, or it might be that it's 2 colleagues talking to one another. It might be us and the patient. It might be us and the trainee. We really don't know, but there's no doubt in my mind that if we could make communication better, much of the time and the money that's wasted in the NHS by people falling out and unfortunately wasting resources and energy, because every time I'm involved in a conflict, it's a waste of my resources and my energy, and it certainly isn't good for you or me. This is an observation that I think is really important. The higher up the greasy pole you climb, the lower people's threshold to behave badly. And I think this quote from the late, great Frank Zappa is really pertinent.
Some scientists say that the major building block of the universe is hydrogen because it's the most plentiful element. But my theory is that the universe is made out of stupidity because it is more plentiful than hydrogen. And since it's more plentiful, then why shouldn't we talk about it?
So stupidity, and stupidity is part of the problem, I think, where people get into telling lies and falsehoods. And it's tied up with this thing that I think is worth reflecting on called the truth debt. I'm not sure where it came from. I didn't make it up, but I think it's really pertinent. And it says exactly as it is spelt out in front of you here. If you don't tell the truth, like any financial debt, it compounds. The longer you leave it, the more costly it is to make reparations. And we're all aware of people who fabricated research or make false claims on their websites about what they can and can't do. So the most important thing, particularly for us to teach our children and our trainees, is to be open, honest, and transparent. And if we can stick to that as a building block of our lives, just like hydrogen is a building block of the universe, hopefully we'll avoid the stupidity that is involved with misleading people and lying. Remember that the only thing necessary for evil to flourish is a good man to keep silent, said Edmund Burke. And unfortunately, I'm guilty of having sat in front of a trainee while one of my colleagues berated them about 20 years ago. And I still feel really bad about that because I didn't speak up and say this is wrong. So the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Whether it's walking past the rubbish that's lying in the corridor, takes no effort to pick it up and put it in the bin just because somebody else hasn't, or because you don't speak out when you think somebody's behaving badly or doing things which are to the detriment of either the patients, the trainees, or the staff. And it's been a lovely opportunity for me to be involved in international plastic surgery through BAPRAS, and through BAPRAS, obviously, I was involved with the trainees. And I learned a lot of interesting things, particularly this came to my site, which was a level 1 evidence that rudeness has a detrimental impact on medical team performance. Absolutely brilliant, but it's probably telling you things that you knew already. But of course, it's surgical leadership that really comes to the fore. And unfortunately, many of us as surgical leaders have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Bullying and harassment was a big issue in Australia. And when I was the president of BAPRAS, with the help of Plaster, we introduced and ran a bullying and harassment survey. I've had people from other countries in Europe asking to do the same thing. I've had senior colleagues describe how dreadful it was when they were trainees, when they were bullied and harassed. And it was a great privilege, obviously, as part of BAPRAS to try and put together the code of practice, which I think is really good. I'm also a morale supporter, so it would be even better if I didn't have to be a morale supporter, but I'm currently supporting a number of young consultants and trainees over issues with their colleagues or issues with the return to work, but I'm shielded during the COVID period. So I see myself as a morale supporter, and I'm very happy to be rung by trainees or by colleagues just to sit and be an independent set of ears. You'll see the certificate here. I'm an accredited mediator, and I think it would be even better if hospitals and departments took note of what is really fundamentally game-changing behavior by introducing a mediator into a dispute, because they come with a lot of experience and an ability to resolve disputes much faster than you will do without it. And I offer my services free to the trusts in and around this region to try and bring people together and resolve these problems. But it would be much better if it was more widely utilized. It would save a lot of time and a lot of energy. Remember, this is even better if you get your Venn diagram balanced as it is in this case. Here I am at the middle. I've got my patients at the top. I've got mentors, colleagues and trainees, parents, family and personal life on the bottom right. But unfortunately, my Venn diagram certainly wasn't balanced like this. And so my family and personal life suffered. And I think that it's important that whatever you do as you go forward, you try and prioritize your health, your relationships, recreation. Recreation is very important. I gave up windsurfing when I was a consultant for most of the years that I worked because I was always too busy working. Fortunately, I've taken it up again in later life, but it was a mistake to give it up. And work is really obviously what keeps us going. That's my raison d'etre. That's what I trained for years. And remember that not everybody's as lucky as you, but it's important that you have friends to look out for you. When the alligator's at your arse, it's hard to think of draining the swamp. It was a quote that the professor in Melbourne gave me. And so here you've got a great example of one of my trainees telling me, pull out, you've hit an artery. It could be my wife, it could be my friends, but you need people in life to look out for you and look after you. And remember that the highlight of my career has been to see my trainees do better than me. This is exactly how it should be. Whether you're a parent or a trainee, you want the people that you're bringing up and coaching to surpass you, because otherwise you haven't done a very good job, have you? I've two quotes for you which are tinged with sadness, and it would have been even better if these quotes had not been given by people whose lives were tragically cut short. Do medicine, have a long and boring life. Do surgery, have an exciting time and die young, was the first quote given to me by one of my Australian mentors. And about a month after he wrote that in a letter to me 30 years ago, unfortunately, he died in a surfing accident. So none of us know what's round the corner. And it certainly is even better if you do surgery, have an exciting time and live a long time, which I hope all of you will do. But for you all, do remember the second quote, which is, you only have one license to practice. So look after it. I support people who've got into a mess because they haven't looked after their license. I've turned up at the GMC to speak out for people I felt must have been in a very bad place to behave the way they did at the time they got into trouble. Unfortunately, this quote, which is really special to me, came from one of my colleagues who sadly committed suicide. So something unfortunately went awry, and there was nobody there to tell him to pull out, you've hit an artery when times were bad. The important thing to remember is that I'm just passing through. When I was little, there was a piece of graffiti on a wall that said, are there no sensible beings on this planet? And somebody had written underneath, yes, but I'm only passing through. And I'm succession planning here. Maybe we're not. I'm succession planning and trying to show you that you've got to make a good handover. And unfortunately, if you don't prepare properly, you'll end up as this British relay team did without passing the baton on. Somebody's passed the baton to me and I've run with them, and now I'm passing it on. And hopefully you'll find in your careers that you can pass the baton on to somebody else. Sorry about this. Looks like it's run out of time because my PowerPoint presentations quit unexpectedly. But there you go, that's technology for you. I was going to finish up and say that it is lucky to be it's better to be a lucky surgeon than a good one, but actually it's best to be both than neither. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graeme, for that fantastic insight. It was really inspirational to hear your pearls of wisdom. I'm sure there's lots of questions from the floor, but maybe I can start off with just saying, you know, we're a sort of merry fleet of younger junior consultants here at Stoke Mandeville with our very senior esteemed colleagues. And what would be your top tips? You gave me some great ones, but what would be your top tips starting out at the beginning of your consultant journey?
Well, I think the top tips are to go and make friends with as many people as possible. When I started here, I went to the radiation oncologist, the medical oncologist, said, hello, I'm here. I'm particularly interested in cancer surgery. And that came about because of the two women I worked for as oncologists. And So I've pursued a career in oncology. And I think I'd just met a few of them, and I met one chap. He said, "Oh, come and have a look at this man on the table in the radiotherapy department. What do you think of this?" And I said, "Oh, well, I don't think you should be irradiating that. I can operate on it." So go out and make friends with people that perhaps you don't expect to be part of a traditional plastic surgery group. Infectious diseases, they're terribly important. And I know that James Chan is doing great stuff with diabetes. And you know, it is about making those connections with people that perhaps you wouldn't think would be useful in your career. Everybody's useful. They all have a role to play. You know, that's the message. It's just a matter of finding the ones that are going to link with your team, and the cogs are going to interact for the field that you're interested in. I do think it's really important to go around to the other operating theatres and see what the surgeons are doing. I really do encourage you to do that, because often you'll see a piece of kit and you think, oh, I could use that. It would be able to go round the back of this problem that I have. Radiologists now, of course, interventional radiologists, incredibly important. So get out and make friends with people, but particularly with the cleaner and the staff at the bottom, because if you look out for them, they'll look out for you too. There's no doubt about it. And you know, none of us are more important than anybody else. We all get up in the morning, have a wee, have a shower, brush our teeth, go off to work to do the best we can. I do think that's the simplest way to go about it.
Thanks, Graeme. That's fantastic. I think one of the other things is this sort of balance between, you know, home life and work life. And you talked a little bit about that already, but with our sort of passion fresh off the blocks from fellowships to really pursue, you know, our dreams in surgery, how do we get that right?
Well, I didn't get that right. I think I told somebody one day not so long ago, I said, if I drop dead tomorrow, put on my tombstone, tell them he had a great time. I thought that was a pretty good sort of quote to put on my tombstone. Unfortunately, my wife overheard this and said, well, actually, I don't want you to drop dead at the moment because I've not had enough of a great time with you. And so it made me realize that, you know what, I wasn't very good. And my wife still tells me that actually I'm owed about a year's holiday from the trust because I never took my holidays properly. And that being a cancer surgeon, I always made excuses that, oh, there was another patient who needed a free flap and so on. And I wasn't mature enough to realize that I was fulfilling my satisfaction of putting free flaps and treating cancer patients, but I wasn't actually looking after my family very well. And so you know, my wife said, actually, I was pretty lonely for 25 years because you weren't around. So there'll always be loads of patients. You know, you'll always have loads of patients, just like my friend Alex said, you'll always have loads of patients, but only one license to practice, so look after it. But the patients are going to keep coming. You can't expect to be King Canute and hold the waters back. So if you don't look after yourself, then you're going to get ill, or the worst thing that'll happen to you and the most expensive thing that will happen to you in your career will be a divorce. Not school fees or a new house or a new car. So you have to look after each other. And you know, I'm so thankful that my wife's put up with me for 37 years, despite everything. But yeah, look after each other and look out for your colleagues in the department, because if you think somebody's not taking their holiday, then look, you know, you need to sit down and get some holiday, please.
We ask you about resilience. So we've got a few questions here. I was going to ask you what your strategies for resilience are, and one of our anonymous attendees has asked, how do you maintain your streak of positivity? And Peter Callow has also asked, do you have any advice for young consultants and senior trainees about dealing with stress?
Yeah, it's really difficult because everybody's so different, and I think it goes back to this cultural legacy that we read about in Outliers with Malcolm Gladwell. You know, my father died when I was 9, so then I was the father figure in the family. So I was resilience training from the age of 9, in that I felt responsible for my mother and for my 2 younger brothers, and it didn't occur to me at that. Honestly, it was pretty devastating when my father died, but I hadn't seen a lot of him because he was always away at sea. So I think the resilience training bit, a lot of it depends on what your background and upbringing is. I failed my second MB, which was the first time I'd failed an exam in my life, and I had to resit it. So I missed going to America, which I'd planned to do at the time. So I forego that to resit the exams. But that was my first experience of people being in tears at the resit board, looking at the results, because they'd failed the resits and their hopes of a career in medicine had disappeared. So I thought to myself, wow, I'm pretty lucky to get through the resits. Resilience training, I don't know, because I grew up in a different era to you. I worked a 1-in-1 in Australia in plastic surgery training. I had 1 night a week off and 1 weekend a month off. And I remember vividly, there was 1 week where I came home at 5 o'clock in the morning, 3 nights on the trot, and got up again at 7 o'clock and went back to work. So I learned to do it on the job, and I didn't think anything of it because that was what I was doing. Life's changed, thankfully. And one thing that I think is really positive, which I wasn't very good at when I was younger, is having consultants operating together. And I think that's really powerful because you then support each other, you bounce off each other. And I was too stupid and thinking, oh, we shouldn't have consultants operating together. It's not good use of money. We should be, you know, operating on a list independently. But of course, there's more of you now than there were when I started, when we had 4 or 5. Now it's much better to double up, and that doubling up, I think, helps you develop your resilience training because you'll challenge each other. What were the other questions? I'm sorry, I've now waffled
It's
too
really
much.
overlapping, but we're going to move on because I think you've answered that very well. One thing is the anonymous attendee had revealed it's Jairam Srinivasan. He's not anonymous. We've got another question from one of our excellent trainees coming to the end of his training here, Alexander Armstrong. And he asks, how do you think one should overcome imposter syndrome? He believes it's rife in plastic surgery, and there always seems to be someone who talks a better game.
Well, I used to think I was an imposter for years because I didn't really think I deserved to be where I was. So you can have that as an imposter syndrome. But the other one, yes, exactly. There's lots of fake news. And unfortunately, one of the things I didn't go into in Even Better If, but I do feel that it would be even better if the regulators were more draconian. I made a complaint to the regulators about an imposter who'd fabricated a website plagiarized word for word from one in the States, and absolutely nothing happened. I've raised other issues with the regulators about behavior that I think is unacceptable, and nothing happened. I think for the Alex's question, you have to take the Burke philosophy. You know, the only thing necessary for evil to flourish is for a good man to keep silent. And you've got to speak up and say, well, actually, I don't believe that's true. And if you think it's totally outrageous, then you report them to the regulator. There's not much more you can do, or you report them to your head of service or whatever. But because if we don't speak out about bad behavior, and I'm not going to go into it, but I'm 9 years in, or nearly 9 years into a conflict with a colleague because I spoke out, and I continue to speak out. So it's really important that if we don't speak out, it's, as I said to you, the behavior you accept by walking past is the behavior that's going to be perpetual. It's tough, and you have to take a deep breath and go, this isn't going to be resolved in a hurry, but as long as you're right and you've got your facts, you've got to be open, honest, and transparent. You shouldn't go wrong, and other people will back you, but unfortunately usually back you from a distance.
I've got a question for you, Graeme. What are you going to do with your retirement, and is plastic surgery going to feature in it at all?
Oh, well, it was funny that you invited me to give this talk, and then in the interim, I decided I'd retire from the hospital because my secretary of 25 years decided she was going to retire. So I realised there was a message in that for me. I'm not quite sure. I'm hoping that through the mediation training that I did, I've been invited to join a group called Trust Mediation that was going to provide mediation services for the NHS. And I really hope something good will come of that, because I'm so frustrated and unhappy that we waste so much money with people being in conflict in the NHS, and that is a lot of money and time and effort wasted. That the effort and the emotional stress around these things is unquantifiable. It doesn't have a money cost attached to it, but it's huge. And also we have the problems with doctors and patients, and mediation can work for that. So yes, that's one of the things that I hope professionally, and I hope people will still feel happy to ring me and contact and so on. And I'll do what I can to put people in touch or have people to stay if they're passing through. And the let's put it this way, as yet unresolved issue is whether we build an eco house or in the bottom of the garden to passive house standards or not. But I've dusted off my windsurfer and I'm back on the lake, so that's good.
From my point of view, this just hearing you talk today and thinking about it has been just a really cathartic experience, and I've had a lot of fun in Nottingham working with you, and I'm just reminiscing now because Dia Offman has written something up here, and my memory comes back to when the entire department went down with food poisoning, salmonella, and Dia actually had to be put on a drip when he was supposed to be salvaging a free flap. I'm sure he won't mind me saying.
Well, that's
Dia,
resilience training for you.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, it was the lobster in the local Chinese restaurant. I remember that. But he has just written that he'd like to echo great advice that you gave, which is when deciding on a place to work, look for a place where you will make good mates at work, people who look after you during your downtimes. And actually, I remember after failing to get a consultant job, you said, go and work with Alex Murray. That's what you need to do. So here I am. And I think that does echo lots of things I've learned through you and through my training.
Well, that's very kind of you. I mean, I really don't know why I've been so lucky. I've had an amazing time. I thought about my comment about when I was walking down the corridor and people ask me how I am. I'm great. I don't mean I'm great and I'm spectacular. I just mean I'm having a great time. And I have had a great time, and I just would love other people to have as much fun. I mean, surgery is incredibly good in terms of teamwork, intellectual stimulation, things that you have to struggle with. It's not easy. You have lots of terrible disappointments. People die. You make disasters, and I've made some terrible disasters in my time of my own fault, and you try and put them right. One interesting observation I'll leave with you is that, how to put it, as I approached my retirement, I got more concerned that I'd make a stupid mistake and that people would remember me, oh, that was Graeme's contribution, that operation. And so I became more and more anxious as I approached retirement that I'd do something stupid. Touch wood, I haven't quite made it yet, so I'm hoping I won't, but beware of that when your time comes. But just have fun. I mean, it is incredibly good fun. And I don't think it's healthy that we and I'm responsible for it too. When I was younger, this idea that, you know, plastic surgeons are better than somebody else. Everybody's good, and you've got to work with people from different specialties, not rubbish them. And I think respect other people's skills. It's really important.
I've just seen Ardy is also online, and I've got memories of him. I remember you saying how he, outside work, meticulously picked the leaves out of your swimming pool. So it brings back sort of many happy memories, not just of work, but of everything outside that as well. We've got another question from Saif Azawi, who is in Adelaide doing a microsurgical fellowship, and is just very concerned not to go into cosmetics, but a bit concerned that there's just nothing on the horizon in the UK. Any thoughts or advice on that front?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but you know, maybe, and of course everybody's in a different position. I was lucky when I came through, there you are, cultural legacy, that they were expanding, and I came here, I think I was the 4th consultant in Nottingham. There aren't so many jobs around, but maybe look at, depending on your family circumstances, taking some time out and going to work in a low and middle income country. And if you're interested to go, I can put you in touch with people in lots of different places in Africa. So I'm sure that my colleagues in Malaysia can put you in touch with other people, because there will be folk who'd bite your hand off to come along and work with them for a year. It would make you grow up, see the world differently, and don't forget that it isn't just about working in the first world. There's lots of things out there. Médecins Sans Frontières, you know, you could go and work with them for a couple of months, and that would give you a different perspective online.
Thank you. Got a message from Rebecca Rollett. She's one of your current trainees. Just says there's an excellent ethos that runs through your department. And I know I go on about it, but I will never forget the first time I set eyes on you, which is when you were picking up litter in the hospital grounds, and said to one of the other registrars, "Who's that eccentric man?" And they said, "That's our head of department."
Yeah, well, maybe I could do that in retirement, you know.
Yeah,
I'm sure you will.
Oh.
Well, it's not my department, it's our department. You know, everybody pulls their weight, and it is phenomenally good fun to see the juniors all helping out and mucking in and doing the best they can. And that's really the best one can hope for, is to leave a place better than you found it. So I'm not leaving it better in terms of the ethos. There's more of us. And so I think that's better. But to go back to the question about cosmetic surgery and there's no openings, you know, it's a real big worry for us, I think. And that's where I didn't talk about in the altruism bit. You know, I was in the fortunate position that I could go part-time and give up half my salary in order to appoint a young consultant that I didn't want to lose. So I was really pleased to be able to do that. Not everybody can do that because of family commitments or university fees or whatever. But I think it behoves the older members of us to look around and decide, should we actually step back in order to make a post for somebody young that we want to have in the department? And it's quite pertinent that we're discussing this topic now, because and I do encourage you to watch the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary. It's truly stunning. But one of the criticisms against her was that she should have stepped down earlier so that they could have appointed somebody else along her lines to the Supreme Court. And my father brought us up to believe that you should always leave a party while you're still having fun. And I do really believe that in succession planning. And the relay, dropping the baton, I think comes about when you're older and perhaps more tired, and you don't then make the handover properly, if you can put the analogy together.
Graeme, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. not just now today, but in the past, supporting us all with our jobs and our careers. It's been absolutely fantastic, and we look forward to many more fun times ahead. So thank you everybody for dialing in, and hopefully we've covered most of the questions, and we'll definitely speak soon.
Well, it's been a real privilege, and I never expected something like this would happen to me. So thank you very much. It's been really great.
Lovely reunion with lots of you.
Well, yeah, it is. In COVID era, it's the best we could do in terms of having a farewell get together, don't you think?
Yeah.
I just feel bad for you guys wearing masks and I'm not, but there you go.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Graeme.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for contributing to the fun in my life. You've all been great.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.